Okay, welcome everybody to the Spring Ag Climate Resiliency webinar series. My name's Savanna Shelnutt. I am the Ag Climate Resiliency Specialist for the Hudson Valley as part of Harvest New York's Climate Resiliency team. And my co-host here is Katie O'Neill. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Savannah. I'm also an Ag Climate Resiliency Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension, but I kind of complement, I hope, Savannah, your angle on this. I've been with Extension about 11 years. I'm up in the North Country. Until recently, I've been a field crops and soil specialist across the North Country. But now my Ag Climate Resiliency obligations and work will go across the whole state. And my areas of expertise are definitely still more in the field crops and soils, dairy, livestock, cash crops type of farming systems. So I think that complements Savannah's knowledge about fruits and vegetables and hemp and other crops quite well.
Yeah, I think we complement each other really well. We have separate territories in a way, but we work together to mesh the two and fill in where one another has strengths and weaknesses. So, all right, today we're gonna talk about our Ag Climate Resiliency program. We're gonna go into a little discussion on the state of climate change in New York. We're gonna discuss climate adaptation, mitigation, and building resiliency, how we can make plans for the future, and then some funding opportunities that are available to help adopt new practices on farm. So what is the Ag Climate Resiliency Program? We're a subset of the Harvest New York team, and for those of you who don't know, Harvest New York is a part of Cornell Cooperative Extension that kind of operates outside of the usual county or regional team system. We really exist to help link consumers and producers to local food and supply chain management, to urban ag, and also to community gardens and emerging crops. And then there's us, the Ag Climate Resiliency team. So we develop programs that help farmers and other producers increase their bottom line. And one of the biggest threats that folks are facing right now is climate change. So we're an essential part of making sure that we secure the economic stability of New York's farm system. So we're a two-person team, as we've already mentioned. I work in these red counties highlighted here. Kitty works everywhere else, but as we said, we kind of collaborate. This is not really hard and fast set. We work with folks to evaluate the impacts of climate on their operation and to help connect them with resources. So whether those resources be connecting folks to the right people to help them make a change on farm or to planning tools, etc. That's how we operate. So our model, we're grower facing. So the way that we try to model this out is that we have an initial meeting with a grower. We figure out what their needs are, what sort of climate impacts they're already facing, where they want to go, if they want to adopt any practices like, for example, the implementation of biochar on farm, cover crop, no-till, etc. And if they're interested, we'll work with them to fill out our comment planner and our climate resiliency workbook, and we'll go into more detail on what that means later on. And then we connect them with relevant resources. So as I mentioned, that can be the right people like soil and water. That can be with resources like funds to help them adopt new practices, etc. Another thing that's a big interest of mine, and I'm sure Katie's interested too, is developing on-farm trials with farmers and other landowners. So the way that will work is that we co-develop a trial concept together. So for example, this summer, we're going to have a biochar field day in the Hudson Valley. We apply for funds for that if that's a needed step. We implement the trial on farm. So that means that we help the farmer determine the right rates, what the treatment should be, what the trial design should be. And then we use these educational trials to have long-term data collection, and then as a great place to help host events. So that creates a gathering space for the community to learn about these new practices and serves as an example for how things go long-term. So in the background, aside from these grower-facing activities that Kitty and I are participating in, we're also working on building the internal and external capacity of Cornell Cooperative Extension. So what does that look like? That looks like finding or creating trainings for technical service providers, making sure that climate is at the forefront of all things CCE. And then we also run a program work team called the Agriculture and Climate Change Program Work Team. It's a group that's open to outside entities. So if you're a farmer, if you're an interested technical service provider, please reach out to us. We would love to have you. We meet every month and we get together and we discuss what we're seeing in the field, what we're hearing from folks. We have several subgroups, including subgroups on livestock, climate and regenerative ag, trying to figure out what regenerative ag means. How can we put a very scientific stamp on regenerative ag? And then we also have other groups like silvopasture and a Western New York group. So what does this all boil down to? We kind of see ourselves as a sieve. We capture the knowledge of CCE, regional nonprofits, soil and water, Cornell, NRCS, etc. And we try to distill all the myriad of information that's out there into farmer accessible resources, because we're existing and operating in a landscape that can be very confusing. There's a lot of great energy happening. There's a lot of great funding coming onto the scene. But with all those great things comes a lot of misdirection or maybe freezing because you're not sure exactly where you need to go. So Kitty and I exist to help navigate people in the right direction. We're kind of like glorified traffic directors and your best friend in the industry. So state of climate change in New York State. What has happened and what we can expect? We're going to go over a few of these different impacts that we're expecting and how that relates to livestock and plant agriculture. So here you can see this is a visualization developed by NASA. So it's a visualization of temperature anomalies from the beginning to the end of the century. And a temperature anomaly is defined as how many degrees above or below the baseline a certain area is. So as you can see, we're continuing the planet's long-term global warming trend. Here you can see this heat dome collecting in the northern part of the globe. And as of 2022, we were 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit above the baseline period, which was built out between 1951 and 1980. Higher temperatures. So annual average temperature has increased by 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900. This is using New York's baselining data. And this is part of the New York State Climate Impacts Assessment. I encourage you to go read it if you're interested. And we're anticipating to see between 5 degrees Fahrenheit and 11 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperature by the end of the century. So what will that look like? Days above 90 and 95 degrees and multi-day heat waves are expected to become more commonplace. Warmer temperatures will facilitate the spread of invasive species and pests. We're going to have some increased drought risk and increased stress in plant and animal species adapted to our historically cooler climate. But another somewhat upside of this could be that we could have a longer growing season. So we have to figure out how we can take all these positive and negative impacts and adapt to them to help to build a more sustainable system. So a key thing here is that we're anticipating seeing changes in growing degree days with changes in temperature. So on the left side here, you can see the baseline of growing degrees days in New York State. And on the right, you can see the projected growing degree days in between 2070 and 2099 based on a really high emissions scenario. So for those of you who might not know, growing degree days are heat units are used to estimate the growth and development of certain crops and pests throughout this growing season. So they can be used retrospectively to help calculate the current growth stage of a crop, or they can help to forecast when the crop will reach a predetermined growth stage. So they're really useful in monitoring the cycle of our crops and pests. But as you can see, we're anticipating some changes there. Anticipated and changes in hardiness zones. So on the left here, you can see the baseline And on the right, you can see the projected hardiness zones in 2070 to 2099 under that same high emissions scenario. So the USDA plant hardiness zone map is the standard by which growers can determine which perennial plants are most likely to thrive at a location. And as you can see, we're anticipating these changes. So in theory, we could move up some cultivars that are better adapted to lower latitudes or different hardiness zones, but really we'll have to see what happens because as we know, we're going to continue to have really cold days. Our winters are going to be very variable. So winter is warming faster than any other season in New York State. And this winter warming means that we have less snow for many parts of the state for much of the year. We're going to have warmer winters, but we should still anticipate extreme deep freezes accompanied by warmer than average winter days. And this has a real impact on plants because they become acclimated to those warmer days. And when we have a cold snap, that can lead to plant tissue death, among other negative impacts. So our future has less snow, but more extreme snowfall events. And we could see a possible increase in freezing rain and icy conditions, which can be a real negative in systems like orchards, etc., where we have tall leafy or tall branching trees. We could see tree breakage, which could provide sites for diseases to infect our trees, which is not a great thing. So positive is that we're not anticipating seeing a decrease in precipitation like many parts of the United States. So New York will remain water rich, and our precipitation increases are anticipated to be greatest in the eastern part of the state, like the Hudson Valley. And there will be, but the negative part of this is that there will be greater variability in the frequency and intensity of precipitation events. So what does that mean? We're going to have more water, but it's going to come in more intense bursts. And we could see more instances of micro droughts where it's really dry for a period of time, but then all of a sudden there comes a deluge and we're seeing a lot of runoff into our creeks and a lot of soil erosion. So protecting our soil will become more important than ever, making sure that we have living roots in the ground year round. So as I mentioned, we're going to see some differences here with regard to drought. So this is historical drought data. And on the left side, you have drought severity index from 1960 to 1989, which is the baseline for the USDA, and then from 1990 to 2019. And as you can see, we're gradually having less drought over many year periods in the state. So we're already beginning to sort of see the impact of that increased wetness. Here is cumulative moisture severity index. And similarly, as you can see, things are getting much wetter from 1990 to 2019 as compared to the 60s to the 80s. Much of New York State is experiencing wetter conditions already. So with all this, we're going to see an increase in extreme events. What does that look like? More hurricanes and tropical storms. So making sure that we're prepared for those outlier events is going to be key. Sea level will rise, and we anticipate seeing some of that inundating the Hudson Valley. And we're not really expecting to see an increase in wildfires, but as we experienced last year, our neighbors to the north in Canada are, and so that impacts our air quality, and we need to anticipate how we're going to deal with that, especially in the face of making sure that we're providing good welfare for our workers and making sure that everybody is safe out there. Impacts to plant and animal behavior. So as we all know, plants and animals are very sensitive to the environment. Plant physiology is very impacted by the climate. And so we're anticipating seeing an uptick in physiological diseases and water demand. So higher temperatures, especially in crops like apples, can lead to increase in heat-associated physiological disorders like bitter pit and sun scald, which really impact the quality, especially for our growers in the Hudson Valley who are selling to the fresh market. And then warmer temperatures generally increase transpiration and decrease our soil moisture, which means that we need to be planning for an increased need for irrigation, even though we're anticipating being a wet state still. Like I mentioned, those longer spans of dry time followed by extreme deluges. We need to plan for how we're going to get our plants through those dry periods. So getting that infrastructure in place now is key. As we've noticed this spring and last year especially, we're seeing earlier bud break in many of our perennial crops. So warmer spring temperatures are expected to lead to this phenomenon as we continue through the years. And this increases our risk of partial or total crop failure due to spring frosts, like we saw last year, and we'll go into that a bit more in a second. And then key here, we need to realize that we may see impacts on heat stress in livestock. So what does this look like? Maybe we're going to see a decrease in suitability of breeds adapted to cooler temperatures. Maybe we will need to select from genetics that are more adapted to warmer temperatures. For example, in cattle, maybe we need some cattle that have more Bos indicus genetics than Bos taurus. So planning for that in the future, making sure we're keeping an eye on animal welfare, making sure we have great infrastructure for watering our animals, and making sure that we have infrastructure for providing shade. So in 2023, as many of you know, May 18th, there was a frost event, late frost event that caused yield losses in many parts of the state, but these images are from the Finger Lakes. And at this vineyard, 40% of Gewürztraminer was lost to freeze. And so this event led to the USDA disaster designation being put on, and this opened access to loans and ability to source grapes from outside the state for growers impacted by this event. Key to note that folks weren't given opportunity for grant monies, they were given opportunity for low cost loans, so this can be a real detriment for folks. But another key thing to note here is that this frost event was really variable within the Finger Lakes and outside of the Finger Lakes. It really depended on your microclimate. So it's going to be more important than ever to know your farm and to know where the areas are that generally collect more cool air and where the areas are that generally collect more warm air. And maybe trying to figure out how you can adapt to that by planting varieties in areas that are pooling with this cool air with varieties that are later to bud break, etc. All right, weed, insect, and disease pressure. So all three of these things are kind of going through the same cycle as we continue with climate change. We're expanding our ranges, we're having more generations per year, we're increasing the need for sprays, which ultimately leads to an increase in resistance if it's not managed properly, which leads to an increased cost to the producer, either through the increased need for sprays or an increase in resistance and more intensive management needs, especially important as we're heading through the years to keep an eye on this. So the key takeaway here is that climate change is a threat multiplier for ag in New York State. Farmers already are facing many stressors, such as tight profit margins and labor shortages. Climate change exacerbates these stressors by promoting more weather extremes, causing damage that requires unanticipated expenditures and shortens operational windows. And these stressors are further compounded in economically stressed, often rural communities and among historically underserved and vulnerable populations. So we need to begin taking steps now to make sure that we're building a resilient system. What can we do about it? So we need to take into account these three aspects of building these two aspects of building resilience, which are mitigation and adaptation. Resilience means that we're fostering ag systems that can experience climate hazards and continue to persist through these tough times and shocks. So that means building ecological, economical, and social resilience. Adaptation means that we're altering our existing practices and implementing new strategies to meet the challenges of a changing climate. So some practice examples here are reduce or no-till, adoption of cover cropping, changing our cultivar variety, and installing drainage and irrigation systems to help manage these water events that we're talking about, where we're going to have these microdroughts followed by extreme wetness. How do we plan for that in the future? mitigation means that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon. So we're getting to the root of the problem here. We're making sure that we are reducing what we're emitting either through managing our nitrogen fertilizer. We can also enhance our forestry management by reforesting portions of our land and adopting practices like agroforestry. Trees store an immense amount of carbon, and if you have idle land on your property, now's the time to work with programs within the DEC, etc., to reforest those areas to capture and draw down carbon on your land. Additionally, some practices can be both adaptation and mitigation. So, for example, reduced tillage and cover cropping help us adapt to climate change by keeping living roots in the soil, and they help us mitigate by reducing the amount of CO2 off-gassing and fluxing into the atmosphere. So, what's the key step here? First, before you can tackle any of these problems, you have to make a plan. And we offer some help with that. So we are working with Laura Legnick at the Glynwood Center to develop a multi-part training program for technical service providers who are interested in helping farmers navigate through climate resiliency planning. And it's something that we plan to offer as well to our farmers. So she's developed this 5 steps plan, which is a comprehensive analysis of your farm goals and current position, the climate risk on your farm, climate resiliency strategies that could be applicable to you, best fit practices for your farm, and then at the end you get a climate resiliency plan and a monitoring plan that comes out of this. And it's a multi-page workbook, but the plan is that folks that are technical service providers like Kitty and myself can really learn how to navigate through these climate resiliency plans, sit down and verbally have a conversation with someone, and then we're able to generate that for you. And it's something that you have long-term into the future. Additionally, we're considering emissions evaluation through Comet Farm and Planner. So it's a USDA developed tool to evaluate potential carbon sequestration and GHG reductions from adopting NRCS conservation practices. It can be pretty confusing to navigate, which is why folks like Kitty and I are willing to take on the burden of learning the system, so that all we have to do is sit down, have a conversation about your current practices and the practices you'd like to adopt in the future. And then we can model out what your emissions will look like if you adopt certain practices or if you don't. And it's a great resource if this is something that's being demanded of you by buyers, or if it's something that you're just interested in personally on farm. And then we have AEM, which stands for Agricultural and Environmental Management. And this is something that's offered through your Soil and Water Conservation District. It's something that's been around for a long time. Many of you may know about it, but it's a voluntary program available to all farmers through their local Soil and Water Conservation District. And it supports common sense, cost-effective, and science-based decisions to meet farm goals while protecting New York's natural resources. In the past, this was used a lot for water quality, but now that Soil and Water is administering a lot of programs like climate resilient farming, this is a system that you have to go through to access those funds. So you have to go all the way through to Tier 3, which is the development of conservation plans addressing concerns and opportunities tailored to farm goals to be eligible to apply for many of those monies. And this is a process that can take multiple years. So if you're interested in working with Soil and Water to access climate resilient farming funds, etc., it's never too early to begin working with them. Funding opportunities. So as many of you may know, recently Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities has come on board, and it's investing more than $3.1 billion into 141 projects that range from training technical service providers, providing financial assistance to producers who want to implement new practices, and then developing markets to promoting climate smart commodities. So this funding is really trickling down in a lot of different tendrils. So we're going to discuss some other funding opportunities later on, it's key to keep in mind that even though it might seem like a separate funding source, really it's sometimes federal money drifting down through the system to become available for farmers. So if you're interested in learning more about climate smart commodities, you can go to their project dashboard. Here you can explore different states. This is New York. You can scroll through all the different commodities. If you're, for example, interested in agroforestry, you can click on that. And once you do that, you see which practices are supported by a climate smart commodities project. So for example, brush management, it'll tell you who the lead partners are on the project and how much funding is devoted to this project, which you can see right there. And then you can click on the lead partners and navigate to their website to learn more about the project and how you might be able to participate in it. So for example, here we have the American Land Board's Climate Smart Commodities project. One thing that's key to keep in mind if you are a producer or you're working with producers who are interested in many of these projects, some folks don't have a farm FSA number, and that's really key here. All these projects require a FSA number on file. So the sooner you can make sure your folks are on that, the better. All right, so New York State Department of Ag and Markets. So a lot of this money is administered through local soil and water conservation districts. I've already mentioned some of the climate resilient farming money and how you need to go through AEM to access those funds and how that can be a multi-year process or a year-long process. But CRF Round 8 was just announced, and these are the different tracks that are available. They've been expanded. There's a lot of money devoted to this. So if you are working with a producer or you are a producer who's interested in any of these practices here, you can go to their website to learn more about the details of what exactly is or isn't funded. And then it's key to go ahead and get in contact with your local soil and water office as soon as possible so that you're on their list for when more money is announced or comes out. So NRCS has a lot of programs that have been around for a long time, helping folks adapt to conservation practices. They're still existent, and a lot of money coming through the Inflation Reduction Act has been distributed over to some of these programs to help beef them up. As we know, there are generally more people that are interested in accessing the money than there is money available. So if you'd like to learn a bit more about any of these programs, I'll send these slides out after the end of this meeting, and you can navigate through these hyperlinks to learn more about individual funding opportunities. But the number one way to figure out what's most applicable to you or the folks that you're working with is to develop a relationship with your NRCS office and make sure that you're in constant communication, discussing what you're interested in and how they can help you access those funds. And if you're interested in learning more about the practice standards that are supported in New York State through NRCS, you can go to this link. All the different practice standards are defined. You can learn a bit more about how they're supposed to be implemented, etc., so that you're a bit up on knowledge of what you might want to do before you go speak with your NRCS agent. So other sources, really popular right now, are these developing carbon markets. So what are those folks looking at? They're looking at paying folks to reduce their tillage, to cover crop, to implement biochar on farm, to implement rock dust on farm, etc. So these markets can be really confusing and difficult to understand if you're not coming from a finance background, for example. So we're hoping to develop some resources here in the future for folks that are interested in learning more about carbon markets, or it's going to be called Carbon Markets for Farmers, so that we help break down what exactly all these different things mean and how we can safely navigate those systems. And then payment for practice models are existent. For example, the New York Outcomes Fund, which is in the Lake Ontario watershed, has come online in the past year. And within this program, they're paying farmers to adopt cover cropping on farm and measuring the change in soil carbon over several years. And they have they're partnered with Cargill, and Cargill is buying the outcomes of the practice adoption and paying farmers $20 to $40 an acre, depending on how much carbon they've sequestered. And as I mentioned, there are various private entities on the scene that are interested in working with farms and farmers to help meet their carbon reduction goals through various different entities. So we're going to go into more depth on this in our carbon market series that'll come out later this year. So if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled for that. So upcoming events. With our Ag Climate Resiliency programs, with Scenic Hudson, with Cornell Soil Health, and the Glynwood Center, we are going to have a Biochar 101 field day this summer. It's going to be at Hardy Roots Community Farm on June 25th. You can register via this QR code here. But we're going to be discussing how you implement biochar on a diversified veg farm, and the proper steps to take to make sure that the biochar is properly prepared, and then how you monitor it long term. We're going to have folks there speaking about how biochar is made, potential for carbon credits, etc. So if you're interested in biochar, please register and come to this event. It'll be a great time. We'll provide some light refreshments, and it's going to be a great opportunity to network with the community. All right, so now we're going to go into the question portion. So if you have a question, just type it into the chat and we will answer it. And we'll get out of here a bit early.